Welcome to the IoT podcast show. I'm your host, Tom White. Today we are joined by Carsten Brinkschulte. Carsten is the founder and CEO of Dryad. Dryad provide environmentally friendly IoT solutions, including ultra-early detection of wildfires. They hope to mitigate natural disasters by the use of this technology, including lowering CO2 emissions worldwide and the preservation and conservation of wildlife. As a serial entrepreneur, Carsten has over 20 years' experience in complex telecoms systems. Carsten, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thanks, Bob.
You're very welcome. Carsten, could you just start by explaining a little bit about your background in IoT?
Yeah, I've spent the last 25 years in telecoms, actually. And I've had 4 startups in the telecom space, in the telecoms infrastructure software. Last company I ran was Core Network Dynamics out of Berlin. We did 4G network infrastructure software, like a little Nokia, basically. And we sold that to Twilio in 2018. Right. Before that, I ran a startup in London called Movirtu, and we did a virtual SIM infrastructure software to virtualize, to disconnect the mobile phone number from the handset, actually, and that was sold to BlackBerry. Before that, I ran for 7 years in the UK a public company called Synchronica in the messaging space, so mobile email when it was still sexy at the time.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. So deep experience in telecoms then.
Yeah, I'm a telecoms guy. Yes.
Yeah. So it's funny you should mention Twilio, because very large company doing a lot of work at the moment in IoT. So you actually had a business that was sold to Twilio.
Yes, we sold Core Network Dynamics to Twilio, and what we did was a 4G infrastructure software called Evolved Packet Core. I'm not going to bore you with the technical details, but that's basically the nuts and bolts of a 4G LTE network.
Right, I see.
And that's now part of Twilio's network services.
Yeah, exactly.
IoT in particular.
Yes, I have a couple of friends that work at Twilio, and a good company experiencing.
Yeah, it's a good company, definitely.
Yeah, experiencing some growth at the moment. So Carsten, I mean, we've never had anyone on the show that has specifically had a product that can prevent forest fires. And when we're talking about natural disasters, this has to be one of the main use cases, hasn't it? For an IoT sensor. So I mean, clearly, it's one of the biggest climate issues we face in the world. So how does Dryad sensors stop and combat, or try to stop and combat forest fire breakouts?
Yeah. So the Dryad sensors, they're basically gas sensors that we place directly into the forest. We attach them to a tree, and they scan for the gases which are emitted during the smoldering phase of a fire. And you've got an increase in hydrogen, CO2, carbon monoxide, and other gases when there is a fire nearby. And our sensors actually detect those changes in the air using some artificial intelligence software that we run in the sensors. They scan for those patterns, and when they detect those changes in the air composition that are typical for a wildfire, they then send out an alert over our own wireless network, because I'm a network guy, so we're building our own mobile network for the sensors, and then the messages are being sent over the network to a cloud platform where we do analytics and alerting. So the alerts eventually get sent out over email and SMS or phone calls to alert the fire brigades, and we send them directly to the GPS coordinate of the sensor that actually triggered the alarm. And that's a first, I have to say. No, and as far as we're aware, nobody's doing it this way. There are many good approaches for detecting wildfires, and all of them make sense. But what we focus on is we call ultra early detection of wildfires. We want to catch wildfires in the first hour of the fire starting, very early on, when it's still very small. And that gives the critical time advantage, that's our intention, to the firefighters to actually extinguish the fire before it spreads out of control. Because that, to be honest, is the biggest problem of existing systems. that they do detect them, like optical systems or satellites that look at wildfires, but they do detect them too late. And if they detect them too late, there's not much use in it. When you come you're a firefighter, you arrive at the scene and there's a football pitch in flames. What are you going to do? So we want to bring them to the fire when it's still, a small one.
Yeah, well, I think that's critical, isn't it? If we look at recent news events in Australia and other parts of the world, where you have these pretty much uncontrollable fires, having a solution which is ultra early really is a must. And I guess in the past we've been limited by the tech to do that and to produce that, and hopefully that's something that Dryad is accomplishing. I understand you're using LoRa, so LoRaWAN as one of your technologies behind this. Could you talk a bit about why you chose LoRa in particular as a sensor, and why it might have been a better choice than other technology stacks on the market at the moment?
Mm-hmm. A good point. So, see, my background is 4G, 5G network. So naturally, my choice would have been to use narrowband IoT, which is something that runs in a 4G network, to do IoT in an LTE environment. That would have been the natural choice for me. The problem is that in a natural environment of the forest, there is a pretty good chance that there is no network coverage by the standard mobile network operators, right? Because the operators, they put, and it's quite expensive to when you build a 4G or 5G network, they put their radio towers where there is money. Money is where people are. And that's not where the forest is. It's almost like the opposite, right? You have, when you look at network coverage maps around the world, where you have white spots, and that's exactly where the forest is. Because of course, who's going to do a multi-billion-dollar installation of 4G towers in the middle of nowhere where nobody will ever use a smartphone, right? So they don't do it. So effectively, we couldn't use 4G or narrowband IoT in our target area, which is the deep forest. So there's no alternative. We couldn't use existing narrowband IoT or 4G or 5G or even 2G network coverage because it's not available. The other alternative would have been to use satellites communication. But that requires large amounts of energy to communicate to the satellite. And would make these sensors very expensive, ridiculously expensive. So we needed a ultra low cost, ultra low power, long range communications network. And we looked at the market, and there is narrowband IoT from 4G, and I said, explained why that wasn't a good choice. And then there is Sigfox, and then there is LoRaWAN, basically, and a few other not so relevant alternatives yet. So it's basically Sigfox or LoRaWAN which can do that. Sigfox is a proprietary network run by one company. So we wouldn't be able to build our own Sigfox networks in areas where Sigfox doesn't decide to go. You can't use Sigfox. So that, again, was not an option. And the only choice, really, was to use LoRaWAN. LoRaWAN is a long-range wireless network, low bandwidth, so you can't do video calls, but you can send a few bytes, enough to alert someone of a fire of it. And it's free to air. So we don't need to pay a huge license fee to the regulators. It is globally standardized, and it has very long-range communications over several miles, and you can transmit the data. And it uses very little battery energy. And these are all key aspects of what we needed for our solution. There really wasn't any choice other than LoRa.
Yeah, and I think it's a very neat solution, isn't it, Carsten? I mean, we're friends with the people at the Things Industries and the Things Network, so we understand those guys, and it works well. And I think you've encapsulated that really well in the sense that you only need to send a few bytes in order to get that information across, and there could not be more of a critical use case, or at least in the top 5 critical use cases, than what Dryad are looking to do with your deployments. And I really mean that. A lot of the use cases out there are for the enrichment of people's lives, which isn't a bad thing, of course, but to actually prevent natural disasters. I mean, it's how do you top that? Just on that note, in terms of the impacts that the deployment of these sensors will have, both immediately and long term, what does that look like? Because yes, you can stop or work to stop wildfires with ultra early detection, but the immediate and long term benefits of that, what do you hope to achieve?
Right. Yeah, so Dryad really is, I guess, what you would call an impact for profit. So we want to be a profitable company, because then we think we can have even more impact. But impact is the ultimate mission. And the impact that we want to have is to reduce CO2 emissions globally as much as we possibly can. And for that, you need to know how much is actually the total addressable market of impact, so to say. Yeah, is 20% of all global CO2 emissions are from wildfires. So that's about the same amount of CO2 that the entire traffic, all cars, all ships, all aeroplanes each year are contributing to climate change. Wildfires are doing the same. At the same time, they're also destroying the world's largest carbon sink, that is the forest. So it's a double whammy, right? So every hectare of forest that we can prevent from burning will help to battle climate change, because it cuts into those 20% of all CO2 emissions. So what is the impact that we can have is really dependent upon how many sensors can we deploy, and what's the area that we can protect. And of course, you can have wild dreams and big projections, but like every company, we also have a business plan. So we intend to sell millions of those sensors and install millions of them. And our goal is to prevent about 10 million tons of CO2 emissions by 2030 by installing about 1.2 million sensors worldwide that protect a large area of the critical forest that's has a high probability of wildfires. And with that, we can predict a probability of how much CO2 would have been exposed into the air if we hadn't protected it. So our models are suggesting that we can prevent about 10 million tons of CO2 by 2030, which is achievable and can even be more if we can scale faster than we currently are planning. So it's really limited by how many sensors can you deploy in the shortest amount of time. And so the sky's the limit there, really. We can, every wildfire, even the biggest ones in Australia or California, they all go back to one single event, right? And the wildfires in Australia last year emitted 400 million tons of CO2. One fire caused that in the end, right? So if we could stop that one fire, we would save 400 million tons of CO2.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy numbers, isn't it? It's interesting you should talk about total addressable market. It's something that we talk a lot about, but it must be hard to work out the TAM, right? It must be hard to work out the actual size of this and what it could be, because, anything that you can do to limit that is a positive, isn't it? And the more and more sensors you can place out there, the better this will be. And is that the limiting factor? Is the speed of the deployment of the sensors and the speed of which you can get this actually on the ground? Is that what you're hampered by?
In fact, it would be. It's the larger the areas that we can protect, the bigger the impact we will have. And so, yes, there will be a cost to our sensors, obviously. So we have a business model that allows us to remain profitable. And of course, we expect our customers to pay for the solution. We can't give it away for free, because otherwise where's the money coming from? So that's why we have a business plan like every other business have. But part of our business plan is the impact aspect of it. So every sensor that we deploy has an impact in terms of CO2 emissions. And yes, we are limited by the number of sensors. If we could give away our sensors for free, we could have a much bigger impact, of course. So it's a question of how much capital do you have, what's the cost of the sensor, and then how many can you produce and install.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that what is great about Dryad and the big differentiation for your company is your commitment to minimizing environmental impact, not just by the use case of your product, but throughout your supply chain from manufacturing and to architecture. Long-term goals, past obviously deployment of sensors, and without revealing too many details, of course, but what else do you think Dryad as a business could be capable now that you have this use case specifically around early detection of fires?
Yeah, so the ultra early detection of wildfires is clearly what you would call a killer application, right? It's the key thing that everybody gets immediately and makes a lot of sense. But once we have installed our system, our network in the forest, you could say we become something like the Vodafone of the forest. Now, once you have that network installed in the forest, you can do other things than just detect and prevent wildfires. For example, we want to monitor the health status of the forest. We want to measure the soil moisture. We want to measure the tree growth. We want to measure the subflow, like how much water is a tree drinking. We can measure the microclimate in the forest. We can help to manage the forests better and regrow the forest, not just prevent it from being destroyed, but also to restore it. Because in the next 50 years, we'll have to build a lot of trees to re-establish that carbon sucking function that it has and to revitalize it. So we want to go beyond just stopping its destruction and helping it to regrow and be the data network, the IoT sensor network that provides all of that. But eventually, long term, as a vision, Dryad can also go outside of the forest. We could deploy our systems in the oceans, on the oceans, not in the ocean, on top of the oceans. We could go into lakes, into large rivers, everywhere where you have the requirement for natural data acquisition. Natural, I mean, in the natural environment. And that's what we say with Dryad. We're saying our tagline is connecting the natural world. So that's like the long-term vision for the company.
Yeah, I mean it's fantastic, isn't it? Because just thinking out loud, you potentially have the ability to learn more about forests and certainly if let's say that you went into the ocean bed with your sensors in the future, more about our actual planet, more so than we actually already know. So not only can you monitor air, water, precipitation, but let's say you had some audio sensors or what have you, you could measure cluster of wildlife, why certain sections of wildlife congregate in certain areas of forests, and this acquisition of data, as you say, is paramount to that, isn't it?
Absolutely.
The ability to learn more about our planet. I mean, there's a famous phrase that says we know more about the solar system than we do our ocean floor, right?
That's absolutely true, unfortunately.
Yeah. But with the advent of IoT in general and the sensors and what you're doing, that's fantastic. I mean, what other just going back to the forest for now, what other areas could you look to monitor and improve by use of data acquisition? So, potentially improving air conditions or to enable wildlife to thrive. How might that work with the use of sensors?
Well, I mean, yes, looking at biodiversity is a key thing. You can track animals, for example, and I've seen LoRaWAN projects in Africa that actually do track elephants, for example, and monitor their whereabouts and their movements. That is something which we could do as well, right? Because we are going to create a communications network for the natural world, and the forest is our main target for the next few years. That includes other aspects of the forest, not just the trees, and the wildlife in the forest is quite important. The forests are home to 3/4 of all biodiversity on Earth, so it's and the impact on that is just as bad as the wildfires have on the climate, right? So every hectare of forest that burns also destroys the environment for the biodiversity that used to live in there. And so in Australia last year, I think it was 1 billion animals that died in that forest. 1 billion, and we're not talking ants. We're talking reptiles and up. So it's a lot of things that we can prevent and help to monitor and improve. It's about putting a finger on the pulse of the forest, and we want to help to regrow, to restore, to revitalize it. And IoT is a key element of that for data acquisition. After IoT, you need to make sense of the data. Now we have the data in the cloud in our analytics platform, we intend to use artificial intelligence on top of the data to help forest owners and policymakers make sense of that data, to take decisions and to influence and to improve that environment. So we're about data acquisition, data transport, and then data processing, analytics, and advice with artificial intelligence. That's what I think we can do as a vision for the company.
Yeah, fantastic. And did we hear it here first? Is there going to be a Dryad Marine subsidiary? Is this something that's coming up, Carsten?
No, it's not coming up. But if you look 10 years in the future, then maybe. This is really like a long-term plan. The forest is huge.
Yeah.
And is a great target for us at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Carsten, look, I really appreciate you coming onto the show. It's been fantastic to understand more about Dryad and long-term goals that you have as a business, and also the technology that you're doing right now. I think it's fantastic. I couldn't be further behind this. It's great. Can the listeners find you on social media, Dryad? Have you got a website that they can go to and to find out some more information?
Yeah, obviously we have a website, dryad.net. We're on Twitter and we're on LinkedIn, easily found by our name. So we're not on Facebook, to be honest. Maybe something we need to do, but LinkedIn, Twitter, and the web. That's how you can get in contact with us.
Perfect. Well, hopefully this will be coming up on the screen now as people are watching and or listening. But Carsten, thank you so much for coming onto the show. Really appreciate it, and great to understand more about Dryad.
Thanks, Tom.